Well, first of all, thanks for doing this. We really do appreciate it.
Oh, sure, it's my pleasure.
Well, speaking of your pleasure, as I was watching, as we were kind of eavesdropping here, I noticed the rapport that you were having with Dr. Taylor, and you two looked like you were having just the time of your lives.
Yeah, I must say that we do enjoy playing together. We go back a bit. I was recording my very first album, and Billy Taylor was in town playing a club that we aspired to play. Later on, we did play London House. And he knew a jazz disc jockey there by the name of Daddy O'Daly at the time. And Daddy said, well, I'm going to bring somebody. In fact, Daddy O'Daly had set up our recording session for us. So he said, I'm going to bring somebody by to say hello to you tomorrow at your session. And it was Billy Taylor. It's the first time I met him, and that was 1956, 57, somewhere in there. And he was such a warm person. He sat down at the piano and he played a little bit and he wished us luck. And from that point on, we became friends. And it's a joy to play with Billy Taylor because he's met a lot of people, he's done a lot of things, and he's got a wealth of knowledge, so I always draw from him.
One of the things he said about you a little bit earlier was that he said he liked the fact that you looked into all sorts of different music to draw your inspiration, from your classical training to blues to church music. He said this is a guy who's not content to imitate other people. He goes out and finds his own thing to do. Is that a pretty good statement about you?
He said that, huh?
He said that.
Well, you know, I have never really looked into my style until the last several years. People have always asked me, you know, where'd you get your style? How'd you get your style? But people like Billy Taylor, Dizzy Gillespie, Maurice White, a couple others, got my attention by saying, you know, the time that you spent playing in church, which is considerable, and the time I still studied the classics, but I started taking piano lessons at 4 years old, and it was all classical. In fact, by the time I was 11, 12, 13, it was going to be Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven around the world, concertized. At that same time, I was going to a multicultural high school. I mean, there was kids from Eastern Europe, Western Europe, from all over the world that were going to that high school. It was a public school. And so their culture was exposed to me during the high school period. Also, now this is all from, say, 9 years old to 13, 14 years old. So there's gospel music, there's classical music, there's pop music. I mean, Rosemary Clooney as well as Billie Holiday, and Perry Como as well as Nat Cole and Lester Young, all this stuff. Dad brought home some jazz records, and he was really into Art Tatum and other pianists, Dorothy Donning and Earl Father Hines, Count Basie, Duke Ellington. I didn't pay a lot of attention to it, but it was there. And the great thing about it was during that period, none of my teachers, none of my parents, none of my relatives, none of the people very close to me that would make an effect on me said, don't play that kind of music or don't listen to that kind of music. If I liked it, I absorbed it. And so here years later, I see that gospel, classical, European classical, and pop music comes out in my style, in my own way. In fact, early on, when I had those first hit records, The In Crowd and Wade in the Water and all that, people called me a funky.
Okay. The point you were making is that you were able to draw from all sorts of areas.
That's right. A matter of fact, during those first hit records that I had, In Crowd and Wade in the Water and all that, people used to say that I was this funky piano player, which was a word we didn't use at home in those days. Now it's acceptable, what it was. And actually, it wasn't. I mean, I accepted it then, although something inside me says, well, I don't think so. But I used to think it was maybe blues, because Chicago's a big blues town. But now I realize that it's actually the gospel influence that's coming out in me from time to time. So what is my style? I don't know. It's the way I feel at that moment.
Who inspired you as a young man? talking about your dad bringing home a box of jazz records.
Yeah. People that inspired me early on that I can recall now would be Dad, who was a hard worker, who went to church, who believed in honesty, sincerity, loved music. See, that's another thing that it was always there, but it wasn't until these last several years that I realized that Dad played a lot of classical music at home as well as jazz music, and then there was the gospel. So in a way, I'm a reflection of what he was doing in those days. So Dad, definitely. Mom, very sensitive person, very compassionate. Not that Dad wasn't, but Mom was very sensitive, very practical. She loved music, but there's these other things you should consider too. And I'm so glad that she didn't insist, but just by the way she lived her life, she used to read the Bible, but she used to read everything. Mom liked to read. I said, okay, that should be interesting. And before I traveled a lot, she thought that, well, you can travel in your mind. If you read, you can expose yourself to different things. And I think that that's so important in what I do and what artists try to do in portraying life through their music, that you expose yourself to other than the piano in my case. So Mom, Dad, I've got to say that Dorothy Mendelsohn, my second piano teacher, I studied with Ernestine Bruce, who was our church organist at 4 years old, and at 11, or 9 or 10, somewhere in there, she told my parents, I've taught him all I can teach him. I suggest you take him downtown to Chicago Musical College. Dorothy Mendelsohn, up until Dorothy Mendelsohn, the piano was something that I kind of had to do. Dad said, you got to practice. I thought you just, when 4, 5, 6 years old, I thought you went once a week and took this 20-minute piano lesson, and all the kids would say, he takes piano lessons. I knew you had to practice. So it was a chore. Dorothy Mendelsohn would say things like, listen with your inner ear. She would say things like, yeah, I want you to learn technique, but it's just a means to an end. Oh, really? I thought you'd learn to play fast because you dazzle them with your footwork. Oh, no. You learn your technique so that you don't have to think about technique as you are portraying this music, as you're playing this music. Dorothy Mendelsohn, very important person, hands-on person. Now there are other influences, people that I've met that influenced me through their music. I met Duke Ellington, very influential. I didn't know Duke Ellington, but I knew his music, and when I met him, it was, here he is. Nat Cole, the piano player. We were all introduced early on to Nat Cole, the singer, but Dad had brought home some Nat King Cole trio records, and so I knew that he could really play jazz piano. I got to meet him. That influence stayed with me.
Been listening to Nat Cole here recently myself. God, he was wonderful, wasn't
he? He was, and I understand Billy Taylor was telling me that he didn't practice all the time, that he had this gift to be able to sit down at the piano and just play these wonderful things. In fact, the guitar player in their trio would practice and practice to learn these arrangements and keep up with what was going on, and Nat would come in one day and out of the clear blue sky and say, hey, let's play this arrangement. A lot of people don't know that Nat Cole is a very established piano player.
One of the things I noticed is you two look like you were just having such a wonderful time. And, you were telling me just before we started rolling tape that you were in Hawaii like 3 days ago, Hartford or wherever it was last night, Connecticut, and here this morning, and although you're tired, getting in front of the piano again just energizes you. What's it like to play the music you play?
Well, it's the music of the moment. It's jazz is spontaneous. Jazz is an immediate expression. People would sometimes say, okay, you love classical music, which I do, and you love jazz, which I do. And sometimes they force me to choose, which I don't. But if there's just a difference, and not meaning one is better or worse, if there's a difference in European classical music, if you're feeling a certain way on a certain day, you go to your repertoire, your literature, and you pull out this piece by whomever, and you play this piece because that's the way you feel. In jazz, you pick up your instrument, or you sit down to your instrument, in my case, and you let these notes come. And these notes, which are new, no notes are actually new, but the combination of the way you place them is your style. And that personal expression, to me, is very important. And you get lost in it. Especially when you're playing with either a group or someone, in this case Billy Taylor, when we play these two piano concerts, who is inspiring because of the way he projects his music, and challenging because it's a give and take. It's not a duel. It's like, okay, we're going to play this song, and since I'm going to play the first chorus, here's the way I feel about it. And you say, oh, all right. Well, here's the way I feel about the second chorus. And you get lost in the music. And it's during rehearsals and it's during performances at night that make it all worthwhile. I mean, the long plane trips, the limousines, and the hotel rooms, you forget about that.
You know, you were talking about the classical influences, the gospel influences. There's so much that jazz seems to bring together in terms of musical genres. It also brings a lot of different aspects of people together. It's what it seems to me anyway. It seems like jazz is kind of a wonderful unifying force.
It is. You get to speak your own voice, but especially in a group, you have to find your place in the group. And to find your musical place, how do you fit in? You have to learn about the other members, what their contribution is. And it's interesting because you have to maintain your personal voice. If you're playing in a trio, quintet, whatever, duo, you have to maintain what you personally feel. But at the same time, you're reacting to what else is going on around you. And when the other person or the other persons are performing, it's up to you to support them, encourage what they're doing, but at the same time, stay out of the way. Now, it sounds like two extremes, but not really. It's very democratic. I mean, you get to put your 2 cents in, and you're at the same time, you're part of the whole, but you're an individual.
One of the things that I want to ask you about is, and Dr. Taylor talked about this, you've been honored for working with young people and bringing them along into music. Why is that so important to you? It sounds like a real commitment that you have to share this with others.
Yeah, when I was coming up, I went to a public high school, and this high school had a marching band, it had a concert band, it had an orchestra, mixed chorus, girls chorus, boys. I mean, we just had all these great things. An art department that did sceneries for our spring festivals. The instruments were provided. And music and art was so important to the kids. There were some students, had it not been for the fact that there was a rehearsal for the spring show, they might not have come to class. But one of the prerequisites to be in the show was you had to get C's or better, or B's or better, or whatever. You had to, so there was this inspiration. I find nowadays that this isn't available to kids in the inner city. Also, which is very important, is when I was coming up, there were places we could go to meet the masters and say hello to Oscar Peterson, say hello to Errol Garner. And if you're like London House, which is a restaurant, one of the few places that because they serve food, you could go there if you're underage. But you've got to say, how did you do this? How did you play that? In fact, Oscar Peterson was very kind. When I met him, and was asking him these questions. He said, why don't you stop by the hotel tomorrow afternoon and I'll show you these things. Well, you don't get that in this day and time. Things have changed. So I think that it's important that those of us who've experienced certain things share and give back, because that's what was happening with us. But it's not available to kids these days. So I encourage people of any profession, not just musicians, but doctors, lawyers, businessmen, whatever field. I encourage them to take an hour out every now and then and go sit with some kids. What's inspiring is when we started the Ravinia Mentors program in Chicago, the first time I went to one of these classes, it's only 3 years old now. It was on the south side. And I walked in, and the kids didn't believe that I was there, that I would come. I mean, they were just, you actually took time out of your schedule to come see us? I mean, us? Well, of course, you're important. And they became so energized that they inspired me. I mean, I'm there to inspire them, but what they were giving to me was so inspirational. We now have the Ravinia Mentor program, where we have 6 professional, internationally known jazz musicians who go out to 10 high schools. I think there's, each mentor visits at least the same school at least 4 or 5 different times to work with the band director, but to share their experience, to share their technique and their life on the road or with this or that musician. And we're quite proud of it now, because we're attracting corporate sponsorship. The word is getting out that these schools and these kids individually respond. We have tools like a cassette record of our mentors playing, sort of a music -1, where if you play trumpet, there's a cassette you can take home where the trumpet part is missing on one side. On the other side, the trumpet part is there to give you an idea what it's supposed to sound like. There's music. It's inspiring to me to know that there's something that I can give back to the community. There's something, and you know, giving back material things is important, but I think giving of yourself is just as important, and one without the other is meaningless.
No doubt about that. It sounds like, in addition to passing on the musical traditions, passing on the musical knowledge, you're also talking about values, as you sit down and talk to these kids.
That's true. When the mentors go out to the schools and talking and teaching jazz, you're teaching kids how to focus and on something, on one thing, and learn that. You're teaching them to be on time. You're teaching them to, while you're developing your individual art, you're teaching them, well, you're part of the saxophone section. Now, what are the other guys doing? Because they're just as important to you. You're teaching them, it's not homework in this case, but to take the music home on your own and learn it. So what's happening here, we don't assume that all these kids are going to go out and be the next Duke Ellingtons or the next George Gershwins. But I think the values that we are teaching them, they can take to any profession. Being on time, being alert, being committed, making a commitment, and then following through with it. So we're very proud of our program.
Sounds like a good idea for a lot of other professions, like you were saying.
I encourage that. I was with a group with some friends yesterday, and one is an artist, and the other is just a business person. And it's important that kids know. It's funny when people get up and speak in front of a group of kids, and kids see that most times he or she went through sometimes not an easy time to get where they are. And kids can say, yeah, well, I can do that, or yeah, this is worth it.
Precisely. We're coming to the end of this. What would you say has been the most satisfying thing about the life that you've ended up leading so far?
Probably the most satisfying thing is being able to do what I love to do, and make a living at it. There's times when it feels so good I don't want to accept the paycheck, but I take it anyway. As I look around the world and see what people end up doing with their lives, I think probably the greatest blessing is that I'm able to sit at the piano, which I love to do, and earn a living at that. And being able to make a commitment, make a contribution, being able to make a contribution back to society. So at one time, I feel gratified in myself personally, and on the other hand, I feel very gratified when I walk away from one of these meetings with these 12 or 15 kids and see the smiles on their faces, that maybe something I said motivated them.
Reminds me, you could have easily been a minister the way you talk.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, Dad wasn't a minister, but he was a very important person in our church. He was a choir director for years and years, and so we went to church quite often. I don't know if I could be a minister. My older sister, Reverend Jackson, in fact, she's a co-pastor with Reverend Mitchell of the James Memorial AME Church in Chicago, and she's been a minister for 25 years. And it's my older sister. My younger sister is the minister of music at our church. So the spiritual direction is there. The spiritual life is acknowledged.
Are there any new directions in your music that you're thinking about taking, or do they just happen?
Well, they sort of just happen. You have to first send out the thought, send out the feeling that, what am I going to do next? And then don't force it. Just kind of keep it on your mind and sit around the piano and what do I want to do next? And there's a project on the table right now that I will do jazz interpretations of operatic arias with 18-piece concert band, which was inspired, I must say, by the collaboration of Gil Evans, Miles Davis, who did some great work a few years ago. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you so much. Really have enjoyed this.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Thank
Is there
you.
anything I might not have touched upon that you'd like to say?
No, you're quite thorough.
I think we got a good thing.